Hey guys, I'm Tom the Tech Chap, and that is a new Xperia 1 Mark VII. And I've been using this for the past couple of weeks, and I want to give you my thoughts because, oh boy, do I have thoughts on this new phone. I realize it's still connected. Because the question is, why would you buy one of these when you could get, well, one of any of these? Well, to be honest, it's because there's nothing else quite like this. We have a headphone jack, we have a microSD card tray which you can just pop out, there's no SIM ejector needed. The power button doubles as a fingerprint reader, which I much prefer versus an in-screen reader. And of course we have this dedicated two-step shutter button, which, let's not forget, Sony was one of the first to introduce. Now it feels like everyone's copying them. There's no ugly cutouts or notches, it's just a symmetrical rectangle, although we do have fairly chunky bezels, but it's kind of like no frills, it's simple, it's elegant. And while I must admit I do miss the slightly more exciting Xperias of old, where we had 4K screens and taller 21:9 aspect ratios, this is a little bit more pedestrian 19.5:9 and Full HD Plus, with a dedicated creator mode, which really comes in handy for me. It also supports 10-bit video playback and HDR10, but sadly no Dolby Vision support, which is a bit of a bummer. Although this year with the Mark VII, they've bumped the peak brightness by around 20%. So if you're outdoors in the sunlight and watching HDR videos or movies, we're looking at just shy of 1500 nits of peak brightness. That's up from around 1300 last year. They've also added a second luminance sensor to help improve the auto brightness and make color adjustments, particularly when you are in those bright conditions, and also improve the viewing angles. But it still looks good, it sounds good. We have stereo front-facing speakers, which apparently offer 10% more bass versus last year, although I can't say I've noticed that much difference. And they sound pretty good, if not perhaps best-in-class speakers. We do get a very satisfying haptic motor inside for some good vibrations, and right now I'm having a blast using this with the new Sony WH-1000 XM6s. So this design, the Xperia software, on the one hand it feels a little bit dated, but it's also kind of nostalgic, and it is different to everything else out there. It's 8.2mm thick, it's 197 grams, the screen's 6.5 inches. It's a really good sized phone that feels nice to hold and use. I do find these little cutouts for the speaker and the earpiece at the top and bottom here collects dust and gets a bit grubby quite easily. And it might just be me, but this texture on the back, which is also similar to the sides, where it's, well, let's just say, ribbed for your pleasure, grip, ugh, makes me shudder. I kind of hate this, but that's a very personal thing. It does make it a bit more grippy. Have I just scratched it? No. There we go, all good. Ugh. Triple lens camera setup on the back there, and also the Xperia Mark VII comes in 3 colors. I have the slate black here, which is, well, let's just say understated, but there's also a moss green and an orchid purple. But all in all, this design hasn't really changed much at all over the past few years. But it is unashamedly Sony Xperia. It does stand out. And no other phone offers more expert photo and video options on a phone, at least not without having to download a third-party app. Just being able to match the S-Cinetone color profile of my proper A7S III camera on this is so cool. And it's fantastic to use as a remote viewfinder with a camera as well. You can either plug it in via USB-C or use their imaging app, which, to be fair, you can do on other phones as well. And it's all the extra stuff. You've got PS Remote Play, you can connect a DualSense controller, there's Game Enhancer where you can adjust the power and tweak specific game settings. We have a vapor chamber to keep things running cool, and of course we have the latest Snapdragon 8 Elite chip. The software is intuitive. I like the new square shortcut buttons in the drop-down menu, the easy multi-window mode for multitasking. Plus you have this Side Sense, which is a little shortcut menu. Google Gemini is the onboard assistant, although that is about as far as AI goes in terms of the tools you get to play with, although it is quite expensive. The Mark VII will cost you £1,400. That's the same in dollars, and actually 1,500 euros, which actually in euros isn't too bad compared to the competition. That is, I believe, the most expensive regular non-folding phone you can buy. In the UK at least, the S25 Ultra is like 150 less, the iPhone's almost 200 less, and I don't think it quite warrants the price. Particularly as you only get 256 gigs of storage, and unless you're in Asia, that is your only option. But don't forget you do have that microSD card port where you can drop in up to a 2TB card, but it's not quite the same as having internal storage. Now, I mentioned we have the Snapdragon 8 Elite in here. That is the latest flagship processor from Qualcomm. Now, side by side with the Galaxy S25 Ultra, which of course shares the same chip, albeit one tuned specifically for them by Snapdragon, it's the 8 Elite for Galaxy, the Samsung is about 5% faster in single core, about 10% faster in multi-core, and similarly takes the lead in this 3D Mark gaming test. But the Xperia is on par with other flagship Android phones that use this chip, and it does beat the Samsung in terms of stability. It throttles a lot less. I mean, it is kind of like the minimum you expect from a new phone. But yes, this does have the new chip, and it is a good deal faster than the previous generation. Will you notice the difference? Probably not, unless you're playing the most demanding games with ray tracing and maybe trying to get that 120 Hz frame rate. But of course, it does also come with a newer ISP. So let's talk about this camera. Is this a big overhaul with the Mark 7? Well, no. It's exactly the same camera as the Mark 6, except for the ultra-wide lens. That's the only thing in terms of hardware that has changed. With the 16mm ultra-wide upgraded to a wider f2 aperture, that's versus f2.2 before, and a much larger sensor. It's 2.1 times larger, in fact, versus the Mark 6. And to be fair, it is one of the best ultra-wide cameras I've used on a phone, although dare I say that is also the least useful of the three lenses. But yeah, otherwise, same hardware as before, with the 48 megapixel main, the 12 megapixel telephoto, along with a color spectrum sensor and a flash. Little bit disappointing that there's no change there, especially for a phone that's so focused on its camera and that costs, you know, £1,400. Let's not forget about that. But I know, you're right, Samsung has barely changed the camera hardware on their phone for the past 3-4 years. It's been minor updates, and it's really been their Pro Visual Engine, the software, the algorithms behind the scenes that have been doing the heavy lifting. So I'm not going to give Sony too much of a hard time, but it is more expensive, it is more camera focused. This shouldn't just be about keeping up with its rivals, it should be out in front. Now, the Mark 7 does give us a couple of new camera tools. For example, we have AI Camera Work, which helps you get more pro-level stabilization and framing for your videos. You just set a position lock, and then it will crop in and focus on your subject, keeping it central and stable. There's also this new auto framing where it can record 2 videos at once. So, for example, a wide shot and a cropped in close-up, or even giving you a vertical option for socials, and it then saves them as separate files. And obviously it wouldn't be a new phone launch without some mention of AI, although it's not really in the way you'd think. They haven't sort of added any AI tools for the photo gallery editor, or, you know, writing, summarization, transcribing, translation, that kind of stuff, which we're seeing, and, you know, whether you use it or not, they may be useful features, and Sony just sort of has ignored all of that. Instead, it's AI behind the scenes with the camera, with what they're calling their AI subject recognition, AI white balance, AI exposure, AI depth. Although it's kind of hard to say what any of this AI branding actually means, although they have also improved their real-time autofocus for both humans and your animal friends. But it is weird for a flagship 2025 phone not to really have any new AI editing tools in your gallery, like, you know, AI eraser, reflection removal, generative expands. Now, I should say every photo here is straight out of the phone. No filters, no touch-ups in Lightroom, which I would normally do for my photos before I post them, but I just want to show you what you can get straight out of the phone. Obviously, there is more potential here if you shoot in RAW and edit afterwards. And starting with the main camera, the 24mm 48 megapixel wide. And this gives us some fantastic looking photos, realistic colors, and it especially stands out in well-lit conditions. What I would say though is if you have particularly strong lighting in the scene or very complex lighting, I feel like the HDR processing can't quite keep up, so often we do get these kind of blown out highlights in high contrast scenes. The ultra-wide is a big step up versus last year. It's still 16mm and still 12 megapixels. It would have been good to have maybe a bump in resolution there, but it is a bigger sensor. However, I still find that in low light, we can get some quite soft images, and actually with all 3 cameras, it does seem to struggle a little bit with motion, with moving subjects. As for the telephoto camera, again, this is exactly the same as before, still 12 megapixel. Would have been nice to see this upgraded, and it does a pretty good job. Actually, no. You know what? I don't think it does a good job. And the more time I spend looking at the photos taken on the Xperia 1 Mark 7, the more I'm actually quite disappointed. Like this portrait shot with a 3.5 times telephoto, terrible. It looks like something you'd get on a £400 budget phone. It struggles with motion, fine detail can look a little bit over-sharpened. I know some Sony fanboys will come over and burn my house down, but I'm just not that impressed by this, and I've tested a lot of different phones. Also, please don't burn my house down. I do love Sony cameras. I shoot on the A7S III. What I do like about the telephoto zoom lens though is the fact that it doubles as a telemacro, and you can actually focus up to just 4 centimeters away from your subject, and unlike the ultra wide, which can also get you really close macro shots, this is much higher quality for those super close-ups. As for video, you can shoot at up to 4K 120 across all 3 rear cameras. And with that continuous zoom, you can transition between the focal lengths. It is quite slow and also not as smooth and seamless as you might want. Also, the Mark VII gives us both OIS and EIS, and the stabilization is very impressive, particularly when you're using the main wide lens. And finally, around the front, we have a 12 megapixel selfie, which can shoot at up to 4K 60 video. Cool, that is a bit bright. I'm filming this on the front selfie camera of the Xperia Mark VII, Xperia 1 Mark 7, I should say. 12 megapixels, top side of 4K 60, this is 4K 30 because you get better stabilization. I just want to show you this little street. I forget the name of it, but it's in my local town called Wells, and apparently this is the oldest fully standing medieval street in Europe. The hardware is nothing to write home about. What does set this apart though are the apps, the dedicated photo and video creator apps, especially when you swipe over to Pro Photo or Pro Video. This is where things get a lot more interesting, and you can draw more out of this camera system than you could otherwise. So for video, you can tap on the little function button there, and then you can change the resolution, the frame rate, all that usual stuff. You can switch between SDR and HDR, you can change the white balance, but you've also got these creative looks, and this will be very familiar to anyone who's used a Sony camera, and also my favorite S-Cinetone, which has been tuned for mobile. S-Cinetone is literally the color profile I'm using on my A7S III right now to film this. Although bizarrely, you can't actually record in log, so you can't then add your LUTs afterwards, which seems like quite a weird oversight for a pro-level camera phone. In Pro Photo, you can switch between the different shooting modes, shutter speed priority or manual exposure, or you've got P, which is basically auto. Again, tap the function button here and you've got so much to play with. You've got focus peaking, you've got burst mode. You can change the autofocus priority. But then going back to the main camera, this is in S-Cinetone, 4K 30, but the problem when you use one of the color profiles is that you can't then change the lens, so I can't zoom in and out. Well, I can, but it's a digital zoom, which doesn't look very good. So you can't shoot in log, you can't change the focal length that, the lens you're using once you're recording in, for example, S-Cinetone. So yes, on paper there's a lot of options here, but there are limitations. Now I've been rabbiting on for the best part of 10 minutes. I'm going to shut up just for maybe 30 seconds and show you a few side-by-side photos between the iPhone, which is realistically the antithesis of this phone. See which one you prefer, and let me know in the comments. I suppose my biggest problem with the Mark VII is just untapped potential. I mean, Sony make the lenses, the sensors that they sell to other phones, better sensors even. They have all their alpha learnings and technology. They make the phone, they have their Xperia software, they charge 1,400 quid for this. It should be better. Yes, if you know what you're doing and you are more of a pro-level photographer, you can certainly get more out of this than the average person. But it's frustrating because it is far from best in class, and it should be. What may be best in class though is the sound. We do of course get Snapdragon sound support, we have aptX lossless, DSEE ultimate upscaling along with Bluetooth 6 for next generation headphones and peripherals along with Wi-Fi 7. But then in terms of the battery, well, Also no change. Same 5,000 mAh as last year, which is a good size, but you know, we are seeing bigger silicon carbon batteries from certain Chinese rivals. It is the same size as the S25 Ultra. I wanted to see how these compared. And so after 12 hours of streaming YouTube videos, my playlist, because, well, someone needs to watch my videos, with both phones set to 150 nits on Wi-Fi only, they both dropped down to an identical 35%. And actually, it was the same story after my 3D Mark stress test. Both had used the same amount of power. So almost identical battery lives between these two, which is good, but let's not forget that this has a bigger screen and also a slightly more powerful tuned version of the chip. So I think Sony could do more with the Mark 8 in terms of battery, but it will still easily get you a day and a half of life. What also hasn't changed though is the charging. You get 30-watt wire charging, no power brick in the box, and also standard Qi wireless charging on the back. And it will take you a good hour and a half to fully top up 0 to 100 with a 30-watt charger. And finally, Sony promises 4 generations of Android updates and 6 years of security updates, but many rivals are now offering 6 and 7 years. So it's good, but not best in class, which kind of sums up this phone. So that's the Xperia Mark VII. New processor, new ultra-wide lens, slightly brighter screen, a few minor improvements to the headphone jack and the audio support, and also a couple of new camera features. And that's about it. If 512 gigs of storage was standard, if we had a better, newer main sensor and telephoto lens, if maybe they just even dropped the price a little bit to bring it in line with the, say, S25 Ultra or the iPhone 16 Pro Max, this would be easier to recommend. Unless you really need that headphone jack or micro SD card slot and are also happy with just having 256 gigs of internal storage, and that is a very small market, or maybe you have to have those Sony camera features and can't just use a third-party app like, you know, Blackmagic or Kino or one of the many other camera apps that you can get on any other phone, sure, the Xperia 1 Mark VII is a good phone, and you're not going to be disappointed. I just don't think it's worth the money. I think it's a bit of a lazy upgrade this year, particularly when you compare it to the XM6s here, excuse me, Stormy, which are a huge update in terms of the audio quality, the comfort, the mics, the noise cancellation. These are absolutely phenomenal. Although I should say that Sony do offer a pair of the previous gen XM5s for free, or at least they do it as time of recording, if you buy one of these, which takes the sting out of the price a little bit. But now I've tried and used the XM6s, I want those, not the XM5s. Let me know what you think of this in the comments below and what they could do to maybe tempt you to buy one if you're kind of on the fence. Thank you so much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, a cheeky little like, thumbs uppy thing, and a subscribe would be fantastic. And I'll see you next time right here on the Tech Chat.